Welcome everybody. We're going to start now with our speaking lesson. Now this is the third speaking lesson that I have delivered. My name's Joanna Crawford and I'm part of the Future Ed teaching team. So tonight what I would like to show you is some of the grammar features that are necessary to get a great score in IELTS speaking. So I've taken this portion of the IELTS band descriptors, the public version, to show you what you would need to do to get a 9 in grammar, or an 8 in grammar, or a 7 in grammar. Okay, so we're only going to be looking at these three scores. Anything lower than a 7 is going to be the same sort of features, but more or less of the same thing. So for example, if you've got lots of error-free sentences, then for a 6 you would have not many error-free sentences. So the first thing I'd like to show you, sorry, I've got this yellow line here and it's not very clear. Can you see where it says a 9? The first point is uses a full range of structures naturally and appropriately. And then the second feature is produces consistently accurate structures apart from slips. What we call slips is even when a native speaker makes a grammar mistake, characteristic of native speaker speech. Okay, so this is for a 9, to get a 9 in the grammar section of your speaking. Remember, there are 4 parts to the speaking, and they are fluency and coherence. Then we have, we also have pronunciation, we have vocabulary, and we have the grammar. So this is what we're looking at tonight, is the grammar. Okay, so for an 8, to get an 8, you would need to have a wide range of structures flexibly used. You would also need to produce the majority of error-free sentences. So most of your sentences are without errors, with only very occasional inappropriacies or basic non-systemic errors. So a non-systemic error means that it's something that doesn't come through with every single example. So say, for example, you were a little bit rusty on your subject and verb agreement. Okay, subject and verb agreement. Say, for example, she liked to eat cakes. Well, that is a mistake, because it should be she likes to eat cakes rather than she like. Okay, so that's an example of a subject verb agreement error. Now if you just made one of those, that wouldn't be a problem. But if you made it every time you used a subject and a verb and they didn't agree, then that would be called a systematic error. Okay, so for a 7, you are able to use a range of complex structures with some flexibility. I'm going to be talking about complex structures in a minute. And then you are able to produce error-free sentences, though some grammatical mistakes persist. So you're allowed to have some mistakes for a 7. You're allowed some grammar mistakes. It's hard to say exactly how many. I would say that if every sentence has a grammar mistake, then you would not be getting a 7 in this department. Okay, so here we're looking at grammar and we're looking at structures and we're looking at error-free sentences. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just explain to you what we mean by structures. Does anybody know what structures actually refers to? Just type your answer in the box if you know. Structures, yeah. Right words at right place. Yeah, that's part of it, yes. Not clear, to be honest. Okay, well, structures are, there's a whole lot of information that we can talk about with structures, but basically, to be simple, they are sentence types. Sentence types. So, for example, simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. Now, oh, sorry, my spelling's not very good, but I'll give you an example of a simple sentence, okay? I like cake. You can tell I'm hungry tonight because I keep talking about food. I like cake is what we call a simple sentence. Okay, it's got one subject, it's got one verb, and it's got an object, and it's the most simple type of sentence. Okay, and obviously when you're learning English, you learn how to do simple sentences. So they are the easiest ones. But when we talk about compound sentences, that's a little bit harder. For example, I went to the shop and I bought an ice cream. All right, I went to the shop is one simple sentence, and then I bought an ice cream is another simple sentence, and the two sentences are combined with the word and. Okay, so and is the conjunction. And is a conjunction which links two simple sentences. Does that make sense? Is that okay for people? Yes, yeah, great, yes. Okay, so when it comes to complex sentences, we are now going to be looking at simple plus compound plus other clauses. Okay, so a complex sentence is definitely the hardest one to use because you might have to put in a relative clause or a relative, which means that you would need a relative pronoun. For example, I went to the shop where my brother works and I bought an ice cream. Okay, so here we've got, I went to the shop where my brother works. Now this is actually a subordinate clause, but it's kind of linked to the first clause, if you know what I mean. And so this is no longer a simple or a compound sentence. This is now a complex sentence because it has this part here, this clause, where my brother works. Okay, so that is now adding extra information into the sentence about the shop. And so therefore it becomes more complex. So complex means complicated also. Okay, is that clear for everybody? Complex sentences are the most difficult to master in English, and there's a whole lot of features that a complex sentence can have, which we're not going to have time for all of them today. But just to give you an idea about structures, we're looking at sentence types, okay? Okay, so with our sentence types, we were also considering other parts of grammar such as tenses, relative clauses, modal verbs, complex sentences, which I've just explained, and the passive voice. So all of these are called structures, okay? So structures refers to many types of features in a sentence. Okay, so it's not just simply a subject and a verb and an object. Does that make sense? All good? You can just type yes in the box if it's okay. Great. Any questions at the moment about any of these features? So regarding band 9 grammar, let's go back to band 9 grammar. So band 9 grammar is full range of structures naturally and appropriately, and produces consistently accurate structures apart from slips. Okay, so when we're talking about a band 9, we're talking about accurate use of structures. And we're also talking about a full range of structures. So that means all of the things that I have listed here. That would be a 9 role. So just if you're using simple and compound and other clauses does not necessarily mean that you would get a band 9. The structures, so complex sentences is just one feature of structures. So for grammar, because there's so many different parts of grammar, we've got tenses, we've got different features like passive voice, active voice, modal verbs, all of those sorts of things all belong to the grammar department. So for you to be getting a 9 in grammar, you would need to have a lot of these examples in your speaking. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Okay, so today we're going to have a look just at tenses in their long term. So we're looking at a band 8 example of a speaking script, but we're only going to be looking at the tenses. So here it's got, you know, put it at the top of the list here because a variety of tenses is very important when you're speaking. Okay, so when we're just talking about tenses, I'm pretty sure you are all familiar with the simple present simple tense, yes? So for example, I am from Auckland. Okay, that's simple present tense. You can also get present continuous, which is the bottom one here, which is very similar to the present simple. So you might say, I am living in Auckland. Sorry about my spelling. I'm living in Auckland, which is the present continuous. Okay, so all to do with the present tense. We're still using, here we've got the present tense of the verb to be in the present tense, conjugated I am. Past simple tense, can somebody give me a quick example of the past simple? You can type it in the box. Good. Another example of food, making me hungry. Okay, another one. Thank you. Yeah, okay, so past simple is quite easy to use. I think most of us know that we either add ed to the end of the regular verb, or if it's irregular, such as drive, drove, then we need to learn those as well. Okay, how about present perfect tense? Probably the hardest one of all of the tenses in English. Present perfect. Can you give me a quick example? Not sure? Okay, so there is the present perfect tense. I have been to China 3 times, or something like, if it's an example of something that's happened recently, I have, okay, I've been in my role for the last 3 years. Okay, good. I have been in this role for the last 2 months. I can say here at Future Ed, I've been in this role for the last 2 months. Okay, so I'm still in this role. So this is the present perfect tense, which takes us into the current time, which means that I am still here. Okay, so moving on quickly now to the past perfect. Before I became a teacher, I had worked in a bank. Okay, so the past perfect is the verb have conjugated into had, and then you've got your past participle. So for example, had been, had gone, had, etc., etc. Okay, so it's always with had, and we use the past perfect to talk about something that happened before the past simple. Right, if you look at my example, before I became a teacher, so there's my past simple there, became. Before I became a teacher, I had worked in a bank. All right, so before that, I had done something else. It's not a very, very, very common tense to use, but probably what I would say is that if you're familiar with present perfect tense and able to use that confidently, then that's going to be a bonus, a good thing for you in the IELTS speaking for grammar. Okay. All right, so we're going to, oh, sorry, and there's one more there, future would. So the future would is, the verb would is actually a modal verb, and we use it for situations like, if I were you, I would go to Dunedin to study. It is very nice there. So that's an example of a conditional would. So there are other modal verbs that we can use as tenses as well, such as will and could and things like that. But basically that is another example of a tense. Okay. Today we're going to have a quick look at a script from a student, a candidate who is talking about pollution. And their topic is talk about a polluted place you have seen. And they need to use these subpoints to help them. What is this place and where is it? Why is it polluted? And how does this affect life there? So those are the guidelines. Remember, when you're doing your speaking, if you don't answer these subpoints exactly, it doesn't matter. Okay, so it doesn't matter exactly if you're not talking about exactly what your card says, as long as you stick more or less to the topic. Okay, so, and they also have another sub-point here. What could be done to reverse this pollution and who needs to do it? So this transcript has been taken from a Band 8 candidate, and I've highlighted the tenses that they have used. And if we just take a quick look through, the red is the tenses, and you can see that there are, you know, quite a few different tenses that they have used. So we'll start right at the beginning now and go through this first part here, and you can see here that whatever is red, it's a tense. So you can just tell me or put it in the chat box very quickly what tense it is. A few months ago around August time, I went to the River Windrush for a festival with my family, and I must say I was quite shocked. Past. Okay, how about the next one? I was quite shocked. Yep, nice and easy. It's definitely one of the most polluted places I have seen in a long while. So what tense is that? Oh, yeah, it's a past participle, but the tense is called the present perfect. So the present perfect tense has either has for singular or have for a plural subject. Okay, so she has seen and we have been. So that's where we change it from singular, she has, to plural, for more than one person, we have. So you see there's a change there in the verb to have. Okay, So far we've got past simple, and then we've got present perfect. And notice how this candidate uses the present perfect in the context of it's definitely one of the most polluted places I've seen in a long while. Okay, so he's talking about a time frame there. Now you can also use present perfect with the word ever. You could say it is the, for example, we're talking about pollution. It is the most polluted place I have ever visited. So here we have, so here we have the time frame of ever. So that means in my whole entire life, that is the most polluted place. Whereas in the candidate's answer, they're only talking about it for this period of time, which is a long while, which is it could be 3 years, 4 years. It's relative, isn't it? But these are the different time expressions that you can use when you're using the present perfect tense. Okay, good. Okay, moving on, we've got here the next sentence is, it had been a long time since I had been there and I noticed a big change. Okay, now if we just go back here, we've got another tense here. It had been. What tense is that? Do you remember? Very good, MD, past perfect. So we've got the auxiliary have, and that's always had in the past perfect, and then the participle goes with it. So I had been. It had been a long time since I had been there. It'd been a long time since I had been there. So that sounds a bit repetitive, but it's still grammatically correct. Since I had been there. So what period of time are we talking about here? It's a little bit confusing looking at the sentence. It had been a long time since I had been there and I noticed a big change. What had been a long time? Since what had happened? Since what 2 points in the past? So if we think about what had been a long time, so we're talking about it had been a long time since I'd been there. Okay, since I'd been to that river. Don't you think sentence a little confusing? Just a little bit confusing, but I can still understand it. So what they're saying is that a few months ago, they went to the river, Windrush, okay? So they went there recently, a few months ago, but what they're then saying is it had been a long time since I had been there before they went a few months ago. So they went a few months ago. All right, let's say, what's the month now? It's March. Say they went in December, okay? But before that, they had gone 3 years ago. And that is the time that they're actually referring to. They're talking about 3 years ago is when they had been there. They went there in December, but they also went there 3 years ago. So we've got two time periods that we're talking about here. December, a few months ago. Yes, that means that they had been to that river in the past. And that's why they're comparing the 2 times. They're comparing a few months ago in August, and then they're comparing it a long, long time ago. And what they're saying here with this past perfect is that there's a big change between the two times. Does that make sense? So they basically had gone there 3 or 4 years ago, let's say, and the river was not polluted. But when they went in August, a few months ago, they noticed a big change. So they're using the past perfect to refer back to a time that happened before another time. Talk about something that happened before another thing, if that makes sense. That's right. That's right, MD. So basically in the past it wasn't polluted as much, but now it's really polluted. Yeah. So that's an example of the past perfect tense. And yeah, it is complicated, and that's why I'm saying, you know, to get a 9 or an 8 in the grammar section, you would need to be able to use this kind of tense. Okay, so now the river runs from now northeast down south and feeds into the Thames near Oxford. It's a fairly big river that goes through forests and urban areas. Okay, so just looking at these two words here, runs and goes. What is the function of those two words? What's the tense? What tense is that? Okay, when do we use present tense? Sometimes I have to tell my Chinese students these rules because they do get them confused, but I think you two are from India, right? You're pretty good with your tenses. Oh, sorry, MD. Bangladesh. Yep, same as Morshed. Yeah, okay. So our tenses for present simple are used to talk about things that are still current, still alive, yep, still. So we talk about them for usually for facts or general truths. And you probably don't need to know this because your tenses are probably quite good in general, yeah. Okay, so then we've got the next tenses. When I was a child, I used to go fishing at Windrush with my dad and grandfather. So can we talk about this tense here? Used to do something. But there's something a little bit more to it than just, is it one time or is it more than one time? Yeah, it's more than one time. Used to go is a frequent thing, isn't it? So I used to go swimming, I used to go to the beach, I used to do this, I used to do this, like a habit. Exactly. So that's another type of structure, we can say, because it's not just one word put into the past. It's actually a phrase, isn't it? Used to plus verb infinitive. So this is another example of a grammar structure. Okay, good. And then moving on, the water was clear and full of life. So why are we still using the past simple here? The water was clear and full of life. Yep, not now. Okay, nice and simple. Okay, so moving on now, however, since a lot of raw sewage and rubbish has contaminated the river over the years, I would never think about going fishing there now. All right, since. Now, can we talk about this word since? Do you know what it means here? The meaning of since, if you can think about a synonym for since. What's another word for since in this context? What does it mean? Okay, so the word since here means because. It means because. So if you put because in the sentence, however, because a lot of raw sewage and rubbish has contaminated the river over the years. So the meaning of since is not the same as I have been here since December. It's actually the meaning is because, due to, yeah. However, since a lot of raw sewage and rubbish has contaminated the river over the years, I would never think about going fishing there now. Yeah, as. Yeah, so here we've got another example of present perfect. Has contaminated the river over the years. And then they've used this would never think. So this would is referring to the future or the past? Right, the future. I would never think about going fishing there now. So that's another tense that they're using. In fact, I'm not even sure if there are any fish still alive in the river. And if there is, they probably have 3 eyes. That's like a little joke that he's making. All jokes aside, the water is murky and has a brownish color. It is common to see plastic bottles and other waste floating down the river. So this is, obviously, this is an ing form of the verb, right? And it's basically when we use a relative pronoun or a relative clause, we could use it. We could make the sentence a bit clearer by saying other waste which floats down the river. But because we're taking out the pronoun which, the relative pronoun, we're just going to add ing to become floating. It is a little bit, well, in this situation it is because it's talking about the present tense. It is common to see plastic floating down the river. Yeah, that's right. But it's not actually used as the present continuous tense here. It's basically, we've changed the clause from a relative clause and we've taken out the relative pronoun and we've added ing. So basically this is another little feature of grammar, is that it's actually this ing form is acting as a noun. It's a little bit confusing, but we may be able to get a bit more information or a bit more teaching on that in another lesson, but probably not tonight. But this is an example of another grammar feature, which I thought I would just mention as well. Not to worry too much about it though, okay? All right, so moving on now. There is even an unpleasant odor near the river in some places. I think this pollution has had a very serious impact on the lives of not just the plants and animals, but also the residents who live near certain sections of the river. So yep, has had, there's our present perfect again. Has had a very serious impact. Now this next tense is quite interesting. You may not be familiar with this one. So with river windrush could even be considered a health hazard if someone were to unknowingly swim in it. So we've got what's called the subjunctive here. This could be a new word for you. Subjunctive tense is not common in English. It's used sometimes, but what we would most people would say here is that they would just use the normal past verb of the verb to be, and they would just say was if someone was to unknowingly swim in it. But it's a little bit like the second conditional. If I give you an example, if I were you, I would go to the doctor immediately. Okay, so if I were you, I would go to the doctor immediately means when we're using this this form of the verb to be in the subjunctive form, it's exactly the same as saying if I was you. It's a little bit uncommon to see it, and it's quite formal sometimes, and a lot of young people don't use it. But it is still a feature of the English grammar. Is that quite clear? Yes, if I was you, it's exactly the same. So both are correct, but it's just sometimes you might see this written, and don't be afraid to sort of, you know, use it sometimes if you want to. It's exactly the same as was. Okay, so moving on here, we've got, I wouldn't be surprised at all if a person got a serious skin rash swimming in its water. I wouldn't be surprised, so this is the future would, and then we've got the conditional, second conditional, if a person got. Okay, clearly the river is poisoning, so that's present continuous tense there. And this is displayed in the poor health of the plants along windrush banks. Okay, and just lastly, in order to fix this issue, the government and people need to unite to stop the flow of sewage and find alternative solutions for overflow. Also, water purification plants need to be planted and grown to clean up the mess. Okay, so the candidate has used at least 4 different tenses. They do refer to the past. They use the past simple. They refer to the future using the future would. They use the present tense, the present simple, to describe facts. They use present perfect to describe an action that started in the past and has an effect now. And they use the past perfect to describe an action in the past before a past simple action, if that makes sense. So yeah, a past action happened, and then before that past action, they had another past action, which is the past perfect. I'll just show that slowly again. The candidate refers to the past, past simple, refers to the future using would, uses the present simple to describe facts, uses the present perfect to describe an action that started in the past and now has an effect, and uses past perfect to describe an action in the past before a past simple action. So we have seen that using a variety of tenses is a vital part of grammar competency. And what I'd like you to do is to practice at home. This is obviously if you want to and have to. If you want to practice, what you can do is write out a script or record your voice on your own phone, your response to the same question about pollution. How many tenses can you use? If you're only able to use 1 or 2, this shows some limitation in your flexibility and may limit your score. Okay, so basically try to use a variety of tenses when you are given the question for part 2. Okay, so in the question they have talk about a polluted place you have seen. Yeah, well, I think that you've got to be quite competent. You should definitely be using simple, past. Try to use present perfect, and try to use the would for the future use. Those 4 definitely, if you can, do come up quite often in just regular topics, you know. Because you'll notice that in the IELTS speaking, they do ask you a lot of questions using different tenses, if you like. So if you're given, let's say in part 1, you're given a topic about weekends, right? They'll say, what do you normally do on weekends? So that's the present tense. And then they might say, what did you do last weekend? Okay, and so that's when you would use the past simple. And then they might say, what is the best weekend you have ever had? Yeah, yep, in your childhood, yeah. And they might say, what did you used to do in the weekend? So that's the past simple again. And then they might say, what are your plans for next weekend? You know, so therefore you would need to be talking about going to or will. So I think that to be safe with the grammar, you definitely need to be thinking about your tenses as a key part of your competency. But there are obviously other things that you need to include as well. And one of these things is the passive voice. And so are you familiar with passive voice, MD? Sort of. Okay, I'll give you a quick example, and then it might ring a bell for you. Curry is eaten. Oh, curry is eaten in all parts of India. So we've got this verb to be is eaten. And so basically you're not saying I eat curry or so-and-so eats curry, but you're saying is eaten, so that it's not, the focus is not on the person, but it's rather on the action. Well, no, we can't actually say rice is eaten by me, because we would just say I eat rice. So the focus is on the action, not the person, or I should say subject, doing the action. Okay, focus is on the action. So for example, the Eiffel Tower was built in, and I don't really know when it was built, so I'm just going to make it up. I'll just say 1765. Okay, so the focus is on the action of the tower being built rather than who built it. So we use the passive voice when we don't want to focus on who did it, or we don't know who did it. So passive voice is used quite a lot in part 3 of the speaking. And you know, the way to use it would be to be talking about things where like you know, it's not important who is doing the action, but rather that the action is being done. You could say something like, if we're talking about, for example, legislation with the government, you could say it with the active voice, the government has made many okay, right, but then you would probably, for the lecture, because it's a you, yeah, not quite the right context when we're talking about. So let's say, for example, you want to use the word lecture. Okay, the lecture was given through big blue button. Now you can see here that the focus is on the lecture rather than who did it. You can also say by and then the name of the person, but it's not always necessary. Okay, so remember that the passive voice is used when we don't know passive voice when we don't know yeah. So what's important is the action, not the person. Okay, so sometimes we don't know the person. If we know the person, then we can say the person's name, right? But in the case of the Eiffel Tower, it's not important who built it. All we know is, you know, what's important is maybe when it was built rather than who built it, if that makes sense. So maybe something that you can look up on the internet, if you're still not quite sure, is passive voice and active voice, and when to use passive voice would be a really good thing to look up, just to see some examples of when to use them, when to use it. Okay, so yeah, so passive voice, relative clauses. This is quite a complicated structure, and there are lots of features, we could say, in relative clauses. Modal verbs, you're confident with modal verbs, are you? Could, should, would, might, may, will. Okay, good, good. All right. And is there anything else there? No, okay, that's fine. Oh, you didn't know it was called a modal verb. Oh, okay, brilliant. All right, well, modal verbs. Just remember that they go with the verb infinitive. So I could go to the movies later, but I'm not sure yet. So you're basically going to always have to put the infinitive form after the modal. So you can't say I could went, for example. You've always got to say the infinitive form. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean by infinitive form? Infinitive? Yeah, good, good. Okay, so modal verbs, yeah, definitely modal verbs are a good thing to use in the speaking as well. So what I would recommend you do, MD, is, you know, maybe do a response to this pollution question. Talk about a polluted place you have seen, and record your voice onto your phone or type it out, whatever's easiest, and then just go back and count the number of tenses that you've used and whether you've been able to use more than 3. Okay, so remember, in the speaking test, you have to show how much you know, how many tenses you know, how many, you know, what your vocabulary range is. The point of the speaking test is to showcase what you know, and that's why it's not a big problem if you're not always on topic, right? It's more, that's for the writing. Yeah, show up. Yeah. So the writing is where you have to be you have to answer the question exactly that they give you. But with speaking, you can, you know, deviate a little bit and go off to another topic slightly if it's still related. The idea is just to speak as much as you can and show them as much as you can. Do you have any questions at the moment? We're at the end of the lesson anyway, but just if you have any questions, have you learned anything new today? I always like to ask my students. Modal verbs. Okay, good, great. Well, that's something anyway. And when is your test? Oh, okay, haven't put yet. Okay, what score do you need? Okay, 6.5 for general. You feel that you might be able to get a 6.5 in all the skills, or not sure yet? Yeah, that's good. Yeah, maybe just not writing, huh? Maybe the writing, yeah. Okay. You're still attending the writing classes online with Ali or Susan? That's good. Okay. Oh, really good. Yeah, yeah. Hmm. It is easier. It is easier, definitely with reading. Um, I mean, the writing, you either do a letter, or you'll do a letter for task one, and essay for part two. But yeah, definitely the reading is more sort of everyday type of text. Okay, all right, MD. Well, thank you. Hope to see you next week. Ah, lovely. Thank you very much. You have a lovely evening. Hope to see you next week. Good.